feel a little bit refreshed. We have a very fabulous uh, guest in store for you, one of my favorite people, Patrick Frick. Patrick was one of the co-founders, an integral co-founder of the Value Web. And Patrick has always worked according to his conscience and has started many, many businesses and many things that have added to our body of knowledge, including moving walls, which we love. But today he's here in the capacity to talk to us a little bit about the global commons and really planet-centered design, which is something that he wrote about a few years ago and then really jumped into with both feet with the global commons. So Patrick, I wonder if maybe you could tell us and start a little bit about planet-centered design and how it plays into the global commons, and maybe a bit about the global commons and how you're working on planet-centered design there.
Hmm, great. Adrian put the spotlight on me, even though I'm already spotlighted by the Scandinavian sun, which is shining beautifully. Great to see you all. Planet-centered design. How do I, think about it, and how would I define it? I think, Jody, I felt it was a natural evolution from when you're coming from the field of design, and we had a customer-centric design, moved on to user-centric design, then human-centric design. And I think along the path of design history, that made all great sense until I just could observe how the approach of be that customer-centric and then human-centric had just cost that were damaging the future of humanity, or let's say putting at risk the future of humanity on the planet. And to be clear that, for 50 years or so, especially the last 50 years, human-centered design was great because it made our lives better. Many, many people have better lives due to many inventions and solutions we've built. I really endorse that fully, and it made our lives certainly better. But thinking of just an example, cutting off 10 minutes of your commute and more comfortable by having a larger SUV and getting on the road instead of biking or into a bus is great, maybe for the individual. I can have my coffee here, I can turn on my favorite radio station, I'm on my own, it's all quiet. But in the meantime, I'm contributing to warming the planet. And if you have seen the latest IPCC report, if we continue as we are doing right now, we're in for 5.7 degrees Celsius warming by 2100. That's within the lifetime of my kids. 5.7 degrees average warming makes most of the planet inhabitable. So that, when I wrote the article was dawn, it was I knew that was coming, but not in such stark ways as I know it now. But back then I felt, hey, we should have a different mindset when we start designing solutions, and we need to keep the whole in mind. And the whole has eventually in human history become the full planet. So Jody, that's kind of the planet-centered approach. And I translated that to the Global Commons Alliance in a way that I think we required an immediate, fast kind of solution for figuring out how do we redesign, find new norms for our global economy, the way we live, the way we move, the way we eat, the way we produce, the way we consume, that sustains our planet. And the reason why the commons is because it is the global commons ultimately that we all share: the land, the water, the air, the climate, that holds this little blue planet stable enough for us to live on. And so that's the history of the the concept and then how it fed into the Global Commons Alliance when I started that about the same time.
So I'm guessing that you work with a lot of environmental agencies and scientists who maybe had planet-centered design somewhere in their DNA, but it wasn't in the forefront of how they were designing for the future. Maybe you could talk to us about how you worked this concept in with your sponsors and how you keep bringing this concept in, and how it actually does play out in some of your sessions and in the bigger arc of the Global Commons.
Mm-hmm. And Jody, let me try to make it, I hope I can make it accessible for everyone on the call for the day-to-day work. So let me focus on that question on how do I build this into the day-to-day work. I think number one is that you know that in design work, starting with purpose or coming to purpose at some point is just super important. When you have people collaborating, you have to somewhat answer the question, why do we want to collaborate? Because it's damn messy and it's often very, very challenging. So you better have an answer to that. So I think I think a good way to start is that whatever purpose you craft and co-create does hold that view in there. It's kind of part of it. So for the Global Commons Alliance, of course, it's a bit more easy because it is about the planet, and so the ultimate kind of vision is a triumph of the commons, which is kind of breaking the tragedy of the commons, breaking that paradigm, stop it, end it for good. And then the mission is empowering all of us to become stewards of the global commons. So in there you can see, oh yeah, if we think of the commons automatically, it is about having the planet as a whole in mind. So if you can start and build that into purpose, I think it will permeate, it will be there for whatever work you're going to do down the road. The other one is values. So that's, I don't think it's any surprise to all of you, but I mean, values guide our behavior, kind of how are we supposed to show up? And so we invested quite a bit in defining these values with the core community of the Global Commons Alliance. And just to let you know what those are, so you can get a sense of what it turned out. One is Earth is our home, our only home. Second, we are all in this together. And then we have things like cooperation is our superpower and science is our compass. So you can see in these value statements, again, you rather push for the planetary mindset or the whole view than rather a fragmented, very specific view. And then the third one is one that I only came to appreciate, and that's really an evolution from 2017. I have no idea how important that turned out to be, but that it is actually not just about mindset. And when I thought about it originally with Chris Lupkeman and many of you, it was more just a mindset shift, kind of how you see the world, how you see and approach problems, and how you design solutions. I realized that only goes so far if it is not matched in a way with, I would say, capacity. There needs to be somewhere, wherever you work, capacity to hold that view. And I think it comes from the fact that there's it's even a physical law, right? There's a lot of fragmentation. You drift apart from each other. And when you are in an organization and you work, you have your job, you have your board, you have your deliverables that you kind of are tasked, to come up with. And so you tend always to go into a small part of the whole, just by default. And that is so hard to bring back together regularly to keep the whole in mind if there is no capacity in whatever organization or system you are working. That is also in a session. So in the Global Commons Alliance, I'm fighting very hard to build that capacity with a component, which I call, has many names: orchestration function, backbone, you know, home team, whatever. But it is tasked with always keeping the whole in mind. All right. So whenever we work on something, that team does think of the whole and figures out, well, what does this mean for the other pieces? Do we need to connect? Do we need to talk to them? Do we need to bring them in? Do we lack certain voices because, ooh, it has negative implications on others? And it's like when you think of an airplane, you know, you say someone, hey, couldn't we just optimize the engine? And a few guys, great engineers, go off, they fiddle with the engine, come back, done, put it in, you know what, the plane crashes. And the reason is because you can't fiddle with one part of a complex system without impacting the others. So you have to create some sort of a shared understanding, almost consciousness, a shared consciousness, like we are constantly impacting one another in these very complex challenges, and we need to find a way to move together. I love the dance metaphor. So I'm so glad Adrien was just shaking it off when I came on, because it is ultimately finding ways of dancing together. And it gets more and more important as the problems become more complex. And let me finish there, Jody. I think for specific sessions, I'm becoming more and more adamant to have a team, what I call the assembly team. And I think MG Taylor, you know, you can look back at some of the teachings that has even a chapter in its own, but I really start to appreciate that, because we have a lot of talent people with a lot of passion. They work in different pieces of the solution, but somewhere having a team that does nothing else but assemble and you know, real time bring it together and play it back, put it out there, say, ooh, this is what it starts to look like. And people go, oh no, that's what it looks like, this crap. You know, okay, and we go back and we fix our part, come back, throw it in, it's like, oh, it looks better. And of course, as a designer at the end, you want to see beauty. And then, you know, you're there. So yeah, 3 points. I think purpose, values, and just starting to really think about a built-in capacity to hold that mindset.
Maybe we could really go under the hood on that, because I think we have called that role the integrator, systems integrator from time to time. And how does that actually work in practice? Because a lot of us are working with complex systems, and I think that we don't have that capacity built in. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the mechanics of that. And again, how does that team put the planet in the foreground when there's issues between some of the other pieces?
I don't have any definite answers, and I'd love to hear from this group as you evolve and petition it over the years to come, how to do that best. To be very, very concrete, we we have just in October come a week-long event, and we managed to secure aside of the facilitation team, support from a major consultancy. Normally that was a disaster, you know, and I'm looking straight at Stephanie, you know, I mean, there was blood on the floor. I mean, literally, because it was just certain kind of service providers did have a very different view about how you design collaboration and how much you can hold or have patience for emergency. I'm sorry, emergence. Yeah, emergency is also good, but emergence. So, but I think the very good news is that more and more are seeing the need to play together and bring in their different strengths to what we do. And so that was something we already tested in the spring a full team of that consultancy, and they did real-time assembly. It was a beautiful matchup with the facilitation team, because the facilitation team was focused on the moment, making it easy for participate to move forward. But the amount of information, the questions that surfaced, etc., someone else had to take care of that. And then they worked with our team on the sense making. And then they worked with our team on the technology side. They were able to do the Miro board, etc. So I think where this is going is mutual respect for each other's craft, finding one another and building very new teams that really just can do things that we couldn't do before when we were just a facilitation team. And you know how it was, I'm looking at Svenja here straight. I mean, we did the event, we were so exhausted after a week, we had to sleep a couple days, but then we needed to do the report back. Who had energy to do that? Oh, and then it had to, it came out a month later, no one read it. At the end, it was on the shelf somewhere. And thinking of that much more real time, just playing it back real time, saying, oh, this is what we're seeing, this is what's coming out, this is what the product looks like. It's exciting. And it does allow that assembly team to always throw back questions to the facilitation to see, here is a really big clash, right? We can see there's total non-alignment or even divergence. Can you bring it back into the session and discuss? Here we see something beautiful emerge. Can you work on that more? Can you flesh it out more? So so I hope that gives a bit of a flavor of what that capacity can look like, but I think it's boundless. I think it's open for imagination and for all of you to build different kind of teams to perform that function.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, speaking of different teams, like, one of the things that we've talked about today in the last few hours was the first sponsor session and the objectives, but you actually probably have big objectives for the long term, for the triumph of the commons, and you probably have a lot of little pieces for the touch points. And so maybe can you talk about how you switch teams, how you bring new sponsors up to speed, and maybe when you realize that you didn't have the right person in the room, how did you realize that, and how did you bring them in to some of those specific smaller pieces, or even into the larger whole? That's a lot of questions, but really we've been talking a lot about long-term projects, but also how they have to shift after you do one, and then you have to pivot and get to the next piece. And just would like to hear that from you, and maybe some of the difficult times and how you work through it.
Jody, I've been listening to you, but also seeing the questions in the chat, which is the beauty and the challenge of Zoom, which makes my mind frazzled. But I can see, help me tie it together so I can be very specific.
Well, let's say this: we have some time. You have some time to answer this question, and then we have time to get to those other questions. I just wanted those to be teed up for us. But I think the big question that we have is, you have both a giant arc and a bunch of little arcs to try to get there. How do you deal with the different sponsor teams? How do you reform them? And how do you find and bring people that were not part of it and needed to be into that conversation? So maybe just start there, and then we'll go to the questions.
That is actually, thank you for that question. I completely changed the way I went about my work about 5 years ago, starting with the Global Commons Alliance. I think that's really relevant for your conversation. Before Global Commons Alliance, I did mainly work on individual engagements. There could be a session, there could be a couple of sessions, maybe it could be over a couple of months, but that's it. With the Global Commons Alliance, I realized that the need of facilitation was much more needed on an ongoing basis. So the individual events became one big note in a music sheet. That's when everyone just like, ta-da! And then you had a lot of little notes where you made music, smaller sessions here and there. And then the music happens in between the notes. I realized these one-on-ones and just being there every day became more and more important. So facilitation happened then more as a constant. It was a constant kind of writing a note sheet and making music with constantly new players. That is quite beautiful, but it only works, I realized over time, if you do have an inbuilt capacity that is steady. If the assembly team or the orchestration team or the integration team is in flux or under-resourced, you're in trouble. But because somehow I think you lack a certain steadiness, you lack institutional or knowledge, you lack the history of what's happened before. You most importantly lack the relationships. You do not have relationships of trust with the many stakeholders out there who you want to bring in regularly. And so I think that was just most critical to have that in place with similar faces. And then sponsored team meetings became more easier and easier because not only had you existing relationships, but you had an existing body of knowledge. You had an ongoing body of work that you could tap into, and you had a lot of relationships that sponsor teams were never entirely new. At least they would sit in the same organization, like, oh yeah, I heard, Nature Conservancy, my colleague just next door from the water team just was in last week. Yeah, I talked to him. I get, now we're focusing on the land work. So it's across institutions, but also deep. If you go down, that kind of weaving together, those are preconditions that your sponsor teams become more and more automatically in sync with the whole endeavor the longer you go. Yeah.
Super. Well, we have a few questions for you in the chat, and maybe I think some of them have to do with the integration team. What does it look like, and what are some examples of it? I think that's one of them. So why don't we start there?
Yeah, an integration team, kind of how we've built it, for example, in the last event, it had multiple front of the room facilitators because we did it in all regions of the world. So we had three. One did more Asia, one did more Europe, and the other one more the US, North, South America. So more front of room facilitator than ever before. You've had a whole tech team starting handle technology, because what's interesting is that you start to bring in people who not only on site but also virtually. So you see much more boundaries between who is in the room and outside start become a little more fluid. You have virtual check-ins with people who are not there, etc. So you have a tech team that needs to handle all of that. You do have a visualization team. Complexity is just, it's so hard. I see a comment here. I mean, your brain regularly melts down and all you want is to sleep or go and have some drinks. But because it's too much to hold. And if you don't have a graphic facilitation team that does visualize some of it and makes it again approachable or manageable, I think you're in trouble. So that's a big help. Then as I said, we do have analysts from consultancies, backgrounds, analysts that constantly analyze incoming data way before the event, but also afterwards. So just people are really able, if you have 300-400 people bringing in answers to what you're doing, just having some analyst that looks at it, how to package it, and that's different to sense making. I think analysts are looking more for concrete answers to strategic questions. Sense making is more like what's emerging in terms of patterns. You then have for sure people on strategy, because what you're doing is updating your strategy almost real time. I mean, after the event is before the event, and in between you just implement. And that I can tell you in these systems, like when you think of the planet as a whole, I mean, literally you finish on Friday, the world is different on Monday. And you almost, some things you thought are right on Friday are wrong on Monday. I mean, it makes you crazy because everything's in the move. The actors move, policy situations move, et cetera, et cetera. So you have almost a full-time strategist on it that keeps updating your strategy. And I think, you know, lastly, what has been a bit lacking, but I would stress is have people on well-being. Make sure we don't collapse and go all crazy about this. Okay, this is an example. You know, I'm sure this is not a complete list. I'm missing certainly a couple, but hopefully gives you a flavor of that in-house or inbuilt capacity of an integration team. I think I just want to say there, what's really become important is to start to have places where the accumulated product, like what you're doing, becomes accessible to everyone, and it's manageable and it's easy to absorb. So you start to have a living body of your work, always accessible. I think that's essential. Yeah, so that was the example of the integration team.
I mean, I know that, and most of the folks on this call do not know that Patrick really had this idea basically on his own one day, kind of had this flash that, oh my gosh, you know, the world is burning and nobody's really helping to command or to collaborate with all the pieces who are people who are trying to make things better. And then you recruited Andor. And so I see that Monique said, what about smaller sessions? But you started out as two people with no money.
Yeah.
And so, and then you built it. So I think her question is, can you actually start this with two people? And then, you know, and then how did that, why did you feel it would have to grow? And maybe you could just talk a little bit about where you feel that it's going in the next few years.
Yeah, so we're fortunate that the CEO of the Global Environment Facility, Naoko Ishii, she's a Japanese fearless leader for the environment. She was the chair of the largest environmental fund in the world that is fed by developed countries and invests in projects in developed countries, gave us a room on Pennsylvania Avenue down for the White House. So I have to say that all the time because Donald Trump came into the office. So we're trying to build the antidote down the road. And that space was really important because it gave us a place to be where people could come through, and we collected all the information, etc. So we called it a Global Common Situation Room. I think in that room, the reason I give you the story, we started to have a list of design principles for such kind of ventures. Like what principles will guide you with such a massive endeavor in terms of the one that I described to you a little bit here. And the first one that came out flat as was number one after 3 years in the Situation Room was you have to go where the energy is. So I think I just want to a little bit downplay my entrepreneurialism because we had this global commons dialogue and there was this outburst of energy, anger, tears, frustration of people who were in the environmental field for their entire lifetime. And they were convened by the likes, you know, we had 6 conveners, the World Economic Forum, Stockholm Resilience Center, the World Resource Institute, the Global Environment Facility, IIASA, and IUCN. They came together because they agreed we are on path to failure. More and more projects, more and more money, but the environment is degrading at a rate that's only increasing. What the hell are we doing wrong? And so it's just when I had that outburst at the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C., of emotions, of like, they saw the light because the Global Commons narrative gave them a joint shared purpose. Yes, it is actually about the commons we all depend on and we share. And if we fail to manage them sustainably, we're all doomed. And that narrative brought everyone together. So I said, let's take that energy and build an alliance out of it and give it what it needed, which was the facilitation. And the facilitation is, I think that's probably a useful insight, is that no one's really mandated to work in between these institutions, right? They all, every organization has an own mandate and a board and a strategy and their funding. They need to do what they're supposed, what they agreed to do. But when it gets to a place where all these organizations need to be built together, you need that capacity of someone doing or building the connective tissue and helping make it easier for everyone to move forward. And that's what really happened with two people starting with no money. But as the energy grew, people were flocking to it, money was flocking to it, commitments from the partners was coming to it. And so it kept growing. The only thing I think that is very different, because we're in the middle of a strategy refresh and we've just started to interview all of our partners, is normally enterprises start with, like, you have one idea, let's say one product, a new app, for example, you build it. If it's successful with some customers, it might grow, and then it goes from there. It explodes organically. What the scientists told us already back in 2016 was the problem we're having here doesn't allow for starting with one thing and then let it grow over time. We have 1 decade. So the group said, let's try something very different, which is, let's conceptually design the solution for the whole, keep the planet in mind, design the whole, and then let's build. The consequence is you have the whole up and running now, totally understaffed and overwhelmed. so anyway, but that has to be seen how it goes. But it is a very different approach. It's not step by step and pragmatic. It's whole and transformation. How it will end, I think I can't tell you.
What are some of the most exciting goals or landmarks that you've reached that in the middle of all this that keep you going? And then maybe as an ending question is, what advice do you have to those of us who are trying to work in complex systems and care about saving our planet as well? So maybe first just talk about some of the successes that give you joy and keep everybody happy, and then maybe some advice for us.
Yeah, the joy is that we could imagine, and I would say imagine not just with the leaders at the top of the organization, but across, literally people from all sorts of backgrounds with different levels of seniority. We were able to imagine a Global Commons Alliance with 5 components, and I'm not going to walk you through it, but Earth Commission, Science Based Targets Network, Earth Headquarters, Earth HQ, the Systems Change Lab, and the Accountability Accelerator, that we could imagine that and build it. Like every component is standing, has its own board, it has staff, and it's working on what they're supposed to work on, which I find just remarkable, because all these components are collaborations of organizations that haven't worked that manner together before. So I'm extremely excited about that. And just to give you one example, just one nugget out of what they're doing, the Earth Commission will, in next June, bring out for the first time what we call the IPCC for the planet, which is for the first time define thresholds, not just beyond climate for all Earth systems, and overlaid with social thresholds. What does that mean? We have a threshold for climate. We say we should not warm more than 1.5 degrees on climate. We have no such thresholds for other Earth systems. And overlaying that, what's fair, you will have in a year the first time for humans to look at literally an operating space, what we call a safe and a just operating space. Safe, biophysically safe, so the planet doesn't wobble too much, so we can live on it. And just, it's fair for most people on the planet. I mean, think of Bucky Fuller and Spaceship Earth. This is the first ingredient of Spaceship Earth's new operating manual. It is, everyone needs to hold to these boundaries and thresholds, because if we don't, this planet's going to turn hostile for the human species, and we won't be able to live on it anymore. So that's just one example in the alliance that's coming forward. Jody, you had a second question, which is, you know, I get carried away by excitement, but the other one.
I love it. I love that. What advice do you have for those of us who are working in complex systems and want to save the planet?
Every individual, I do acknowledge is different. My personal story is one that I now see with many of my fellow travelers happening at the same time, which gives me confidence I should say this because it seems to be way bigger than an individual story. But you know, and I think Stephanie can totally emphasize with that, but she's been on this journey for so long, that when we started as a community work as facilitators more in the nonprofit sector, specifically on social environmental issues, we were always at the service of a client. And that was really exciting. And I mean, I was proud of the clients we worked for, you know, Gavi, UNICEF, World Economic Forum, etc. Amazing to work with them. But what flipped with me with the Global Commons Alliance is I heard and I saw from the world's leading scientists what was going on. And I could see it's gonna get real bad, even within the lifetime of my children. And so it made me an activist. That made me show up very differently as a facilitator. I had a point of view, which is very much debated in the facilitation community, if you should be allowed to have a point of view, or if you are at the service of what the group, you know, wants to happen and you help that go forward. I'm now in a situation where I see things that I think should not go forward and I fight them. That is not very facilitator-like. I don't know what it is, but I just can say that if we don't find a way to manage our commons in a sustainable way, this is not going to end well. And so I dedicated myself to that path, and I'm using my skill set in service of that end purpose instead of a client that was mine before. Yeah, so my advice, this is the decade. There's no more bystanders. I don't think you can watch. We need everyone just to come in. Yeah.
Patrick, thank you so very much for giving us your story and sharing this exciting journey with us and your learnings. And yeah, super. Good luck to you, and we're all can't wait to hear and jump in.
Great, and great you're doing the academy. I'm really, really happy about that. Building the capacity and the skills with people that can do that kind of work is going to be crucial. So thank you all for participating and letting me come in. Yeah, see you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Patrick.
Thanks, Patrick.
Ciao, everyone.
Thank you, Patrick. Bye.
Bye, Patrick.
Bye.